Ben, do you agree that if any company has a claim to the Bell Labs legacy, it's Google?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've talked about that on this podcast before, and this is, I mean, I guess it says something about me, and I'm the wrong person to ask about quantum computing, where this question gets me much more excited, and I'm like, oh, my sort of brain
Let's
gears
roll up our
turning.
sleeves and talk
Right.
through it. Yeah.
No, because it's an interesting sort of governance and philosophical question, right? Should we worry, like Google One Search? Congratulations. Is it actually a better net positive that instead of going after them and trying to push against a string, as I frequently talk about, and undo this search monopoly, we should say, hey, yeah, just keep shoveling your money sort of into these science projects. Should there be some sort of, similar to the Bell Labs, like part of the settlements the government had with AT&T over the years, is they couldn't sort of go into those industries. They could only use those inventions for their own. And it worked out because things like transistors and information, what's the word I'm looking for? Like all the stuff they were working on was relevant to phone service. And so they got a benefit, but obviously it basically birthed modern computing. And it's hard to argue that that wasn't a big sort of net win. Like Bell Labs was basically the R&D department of the U.S. This is a point that Bernard Hobart made in his book in our interview a couple of weeks ago. It was basically the R&D lab for the U.S. government. The U.S. government could basically not have to spend all the money to do like public R&D. They could just tolerate the AT&T monopoly and say, you do all the money for R&D. And it, again, U.S. sort of technological power is predicated on a lot of inventions that came out of Bell Labs. Now, is there some sort of disconnect here where what Google does ought to be shared more broadly? Transformers is a good example of what we want. It was a public paper. Anyone could pick up on it and do it, and they did. And the fact that it's not sort of patented is a real victory. Should there be something similar with a Waymo or whatever it might be? Maybe. I mean, and is it really a criticism that, they're inventing stuff that's not being sort of monetized, or
right.
I think that I'm not completely sure how to structure this. Like, do you just sort of back into a Bell Lab situation? Can you actually do it with purpose? I certainly tend to agree that a lot of the modern antitrust crusaders spend a lot of time on challenges that they're not going to solve, and that unfortunately have the outcome of not really helping anyone, including potentially killing stuff like this. So I think that that's a fair critique. But hey, it is an interesting philosophical discussion. What do you think?
Well, no, I mean, it first of all, yes, I think that Google is the closest we have to a modern day Bell Labs. I mean, if we could get a look at the internal projects from every company in big tech, I think Apple would be the most entertaining to see, the Apple car and various failed ideas over the last 15 or 20 years. But Google, if everything they were working on was just released to the public domain tomorrow, I would guess, based on what I've read over the last couple of years, that their tech would have the most benefits to society at large and technological progress. And it's almost more interesting to have a company like that existing today than it was during the Bell Labs era, because now it feels like the government, I don't know that the government is capable of pushing forward on the technological front. Whereas 50, 75 years ago, I would trust the government more in that area. And so it seems like we've sort of outsourced a lot of technological innovation and research and R&D just generally to the private sector. And there are real benefits to that. And I don't know if that went away, I'm not sure who would be pushing forward. If it's not a company like Google that's sitting on just a mountain of cash and can afford to take moonshots in a variety of areas. Like I do think that's a real benefit to consider in this conversation.
Yeah, well, I mean, governments can still kill stuff though, and I mean, you folks seem to be going after Google. Just leave for Google alone.
Well, look, the theme of the podcast, there are trade-offs in every area. There's a real cost to competition and innovation with Google's success, but they also are funding crazy moonshots and empowering Hartmut Nevin to do his worst out there and push forward on quantum computing. So
I mean, the
we'll
quantum
see
computing
where
thing,
it all nets out.
there are other like folks working on it. Like I know Microsoft's been working on it for a long time. You meant the Apple mention is interesting because Apple generally does not do this kind of things. This was actually a comparison that I thought was interesting between Nvidia and Apple that stood out to me when I was reading Tay Kim's book. Is Apple's pretty relentlessly focused on inventing for products. Like if it's not obviously commercializable, again, in this, like an Apple car, it wasn't theoretical, could this be a product? And once it was determined it's not going to be a product, then we're not going to just keep doing sort of research.
And that's, for the record, is why Apple would be so entertaining, because it's like, these are things that we might have used and that might have gone to market. Whereas Google, I feel like it's a little bit more abstract, and you'd have to be like a real developer or engineer to appreciate the brilliance that exists there and could benefit the world.
Right. And from a shareholder and sort of analyst perspective, it's like, what are you wasting money on? Like, what's the point here?
Totally.